Hello and welcome. I'm Andrew, and in this video I will tell you about my recent trip to Georgia and my experience in the country. So why I went to Georgia? So I follow what we call a flag strategy. So this is where you set up different things in different countries. It's based on the idea that the place where you might want to do banking, that is the best place for banking, for example, might not be the best place for living. The best place for living might not be the best place to set up a business, for example. Or the best place to have citizenship, or the place where you have citizenship might also not be the place where you want to bank or live. So the idea is that nowadays it's not necessary to have everything in one country, and even in some cases it's not advisable. It's always a good idea to have backup, to have extra options, and to spread things out. And in some cases you might want to have more than one thing in more than one country. So this is the strategy that I advise and that I follow myself. So I went to Georgia because, I like to travel, but also because nowadays a lot of people who are able to work remotely, they go to Georgia. They go there for the kind of lifestyle, they go there for the cost of living, for tax reasons also, more on that later. And a lot of people go to Georgia just to open a bank account, either as a backup or even as their main bank account. So for me, this was actually one of the main goals in the country, to go there and to try to open a bank account. So I will tell you about my experience. And also I went there for investment opportunities, to pursue investment opportunities. So nowadays, if you want to, for example, invest in real estate in the West, you might have noticed that the prices are very high, and that it seems like the prices might go down anytime. It seems overpriced. The entry point is very high. So either for many people they cannot afford it, or they feel like they are not able to diversify. They'll have to put all their money in one basket. Perhaps they don't want to invest in the country where they're living, where they don't see good potential for the future. So it was also to look for new opportunities in that regard, to get some feeling for this. So let's talk about the banking. So I went to Georgia to open a bank account, and I didn't really know what to expect exactly. So I've heard a lot of good things about banking in Georgia. I was interested in many reasons to visit Georgia, to open a bank account, to have a bank account outside of Europe and the European Union, as a backup or perhaps as a main bank account. So Georgia at the moment, and this is something that's set to change perhaps soon, is not part of the common reporting standard. So if you enjoy privacy, of course, we're not hiding anything, and we don't suggest that you do either. But of course, you report what you legally have to, but why should someone be allowed to spy on you? So perhaps for this reason you like to have a bank account somewhere else. Or perhaps you want to have a bank account outside of the Western world, because who knows what's going to happen with the governments going more and more crazy every day. So this was a goal, and I didn't know exactly what to expect, how long it would take. So I've had some experience in some other countries like Serbia or Montenegro, that they allow a non-resident. So this is someone who doesn't have an address in the country, someone who doesn't live there, to open a bank account. But the process is not guaranteed, and it can take some time. So like you have to be pre-approved, and then you have to come back, and then after some weeks you might be allowed to open it. So I thought, well, maybe it could be this way. Of course, I've been in touch with some banks before, and they told me that they take it on case-by-case basis. That's usually the answer you get when you inquire about it, especially remotely. So I arrived to Georgia, and on the first and second day I visited a couple of banks, And the first two banks that I visited, they told me that I would have to pay 50 Georgian lari, so it's like 17, 18 euros, for them to start having a conversation with me, and then it would take a few days to get the decision, and then I have to come back to open a bank account. So I thought like, okay, this is not ideal, but it's a start, but I thought maybe I'll look around a little bit more. And then the third bank I went to, there was a Bank of Georgia. They said something similar, but it sounded like I would not have to pay anything, and that they started the process right away. They told me what the options are, what the conditions are, what the limits are. So it felt like they were ready to open on the spot. And also, even when I arrived there, the atmosphere was a bit different. So when I inquired about opening non-resident bank account, there was an assistant who pressed the button for me to get the ticket, and there was a button specifically for non-resident. So then I waited for a while, and then I was serviced by an advisor who spoke very good English. And actually they opened, it took quite a while, maybe 40 minutes or over an hour, but they opened the bank account on the spot for me. So they asked me some documents. I had to show my passport, of course. They wanted to know about my tax residence, so I had to provide some information regarding that. I explained that in my situation I have more than one address for different things, so this was something that they were understanding about, and they wanted the address connected to my tax residence, so that was the only one they wanted to know. They put that down. I did not have to prove that in any way. This is not a guarantee that this has to be that for everyone. I imagine that depending on your nationality, for example, the process might be different. I think that's certainly the case. I think, for example, for Russians, it's not as straightforward as it was for someone who has a European passport. But nevertheless, they opened on the spot. Something that I was very impressed and very interested in is that they gave me a debit card on the spot. So I got two actually. So one is a kind of their own local thing, which they claimed works only in Georgia. And what I discovered is that it only works in some places in Georgia, not everywhere. But what's very interesting is that it's co-branded with American Express. And I've tested it, and of course it works outside of Georgia where American Express is accepted. They gave me a second card. This was part of the account, MasterCard. And what is very interesting, both of these cards are anonymous cards. So that's also how they were able to give them on the spot. There is no name on those cards. Of course, it's connected to your account, so if someone really wanted to find out, they probably could. But I was not sure if this would work in Europe, especially online. So I've asked for an extra card for which I'm paying something like €3 extra per year. The basic account package is 120 lari per year. So the conversion rate is roughly divided by 3 into euros. So this is quite okay. They also offer some premium packages which cost more, but from what I've seen, if you're going to spend more time in Georgia or don't have good premium banking in your country, this can be quite a good deal. For now, I stick with the basic package, so I have these 3 cards. One of them is with my name, because I wasn't sure how that will work if there's no name on it. Once I've set up in the mobile and internet banking, I saw their banking system is very good. So you need to have a phone number from Georgia, a local one, to set up, which is quite easy to get, to set up the bank account. But afterwards you can set up a foreign number there as well, and you can set that the messages will go to that number. So it's very usable outside of Georgia also. And for the anonymous cards, so when you go to the card details there, then for the name it says card holder. and I've tested that, and when you purchase something online, you can set a car holder as the name and it works fine. So with this account I have 2 anonymous debit cards as well. Very interesting. As for the card itself, the MasterCard, what's very interesting is that from what I can see on the card, it's classified by MasterCard as a credit card, but it works as a debit card. I'm not sure if that has some consequences in certain points of sale and websites, or it's just a mistake of the logo, but that's also something interesting. Overall, the experience was very positive. I had a feeling from the start and also afterwards that they were very happy and very keen to have me as a client. Just today, this morning, I had a call from them asking about what my experience was opening the bank account, submitting the documents. And when I opened the bank account over 2 weeks ago, I had a message explaining how happy they were with me as a client. And there is a customer support chat that works 24/7. You get a response usually within a second. If you need anything, if you have questions, if you want to set up new products, cancel products, something I've tried myself. I tried to apply for new accounts, a new card, and also I tried canceling it. And generally speaking, I was either able to do that myself within seconds within the app, or they helped me with the chat, and within minutes it was done. So I've set up an interest deposit account. I'm getting 7% interest on the Georgian lari, and they offer also higher interests if you don't need flexible withdrawal and deposits. If you have a time deposit, you can get up to 11% per year. The account comes for free with as a multi-currency account. So you have their currency, Georgian lari. You also have dollars, euros, and British pounds. It's all there together. They give you bank details for each of those accounts. And if you transfer money there in that currency, then it's deposited in that currency. There is no currency conversion fees. And if you pay with your card in one of those currencies, it's deducted out automatically from that balance, and there is no currency conversion. So that's also all very nice and works very well. So overall, I would say this is something I can definitely recommend. And also something interesting when I wanted to send some money to that account. So I've used Wise. I have a multi-currency account with Wise. And depending on the amount you're sending, it's beneficial either to send it in one of the foreign currencies you have, or in Georgian lari. And generally speaking, the transfer was very fast. Either within seconds or a couple of hours, the money was on the account. And the fees were minimal. So if you don't have a Wise account, which is something we've recommended in another video, it's something we recommend you set up. You can use our referral code to set it up if you like to. And if you want to have a bank account in Georgia and you cannot or don't want to go there yourself, we have made contact with people that we have met personally, who we trust and who can do the process for you for some small fee. Overall, I would recommend that you go to Georgia yourself and go through the experience, but if you don't have time, or you live somewhere like Australia where the cost of going there would not be worth it, then there are people who can do it for you. Now, I would like to say something about other topics in Georgia. So something about taxation and cost of living, which would be one of the reasons that you'd want to live there. So if you'd want to establish tax residence in Georgia, you either have to be a high net worth individual and make some substantial investments in Georgia, or more generally speaking, you have to spend at least 183 days on the ground in Georgia, and then you can set up a tax residence there. If that's not something for you, you probably will not qualify for tax residence there. And if you do qualify for tax residence there, what's beneficial is to set up a business there. You can register a business as a freelancer. So like a kind of the equivalent of that in English-speaking countries is a sole trader or sole proprietor. So this is a sort of freelancer license where you don't have a separation between your business and personal finances, and in this case the tax rate is 1%, provided you qualify for the tax residence. You can also establish a limited liability company, but here the tax rate is much higher. It's about 20%. So I would say this is not really worth it to do that in Georgia. There's other places where you can get much better deals, including in Europe. So opening company is not something I've done myself yet, but it's something I'm perhaps going to do in the future. It seems that the main benefit of opening a company there, apart from it being a KYC document, which has some value by itself from such a country, is if you are able to qualify for the tax residence. But there can be another possibility, and that is if you'd like to set up a residence permit in Georgia, perhaps as a backup, so that you have some place that you can come back to, then this can be done the most easily by setting up a company. So if you open a company in Georgia, you will need to have an address in Georgia, but that's quite easy to set up. There's a lot of people who, if you give them some small amount of money, like equivalent of 30-40 euros, they will say, okay, you can do it on my address, and it's a one-time thing, and after that it has no consequences for anybody. So that's quite easy. And generally speaking, if you go to these places from the government where you register a company, there will even be people in front who will offer that to you. I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it, but certainly there are people you can find who can do that for you. We also have people who we work with who can open that remotely for you, and then they handle the business registration address for you. So if you set up a company in Georgia and you can show you have a turnover there at least 50,000 Georgian lari per year, which is about 18,000 euros. So it's not that high for a business income. It's certainly not something you can probably live from in Europe or the US. In Georgia, that's probably something you can live from, so that's probably the reason for that limit. So then you can use that to apply for a residence permit. In the first instance, you will get a permit for 1 year. If you want to apply for that, this is the only thing that cannot be done remotely. So for that, you would have to go to Georgia. Everything else, there are people that can help you with that remotely. And after that, when it's time to renew, you have to again demonstrate the turnover. But in this case, it's possible to renew it for a longer time, up to 5 years. So as for most Westerners, for example, with an EU passport, you can stay in Georgia visa-free for 365 days. And after that period, you can simply cross the border somewhere, get a stamp, and come back for another 365 days. So for someone like that, there isn't a lot of incentive to try to do that, unless you want to have a solid backup place where you can go anytime without needing, needing visa. If you think that, for example, in the future a situation will change, it could become more difficult. Certainly, during the pandemic, if you wanted to go to Georgia, there were testing and quarantine requirements for foreigners. But as far as I remember, for people with a residence permit or citizens, these restrictions didn't apply. So there you go, it can have some benefits. Now, in terms of if you want to live there or spend some substantial amount of time, something you might want to be interested in is the travel. How easy it is to travel within the country, between different cities, how easy it is to travel to other countries. So in Georgia, you have the capital, Tbilisi, which has an international airport. There is a second largest city, Batumi, at the sea, at the Black Sea, so this is in the west. It's quite far from each other. There is a direct train in between, which is kind of advertised as a high-speed train. The maximum speed is only 120 kilometers per hour. Nevertheless, the quality of the train is on the level of the best trains in Europe. So that was quite surprising, and it's very interesting. Generally speaking, most of the time the train is on time. That's what the locals say. My first experience with the train was a 1 hour delay, but locals have assured me that normally that doesn't happen. Nevertheless, the train was very nice and very comfortable. So Batumi is a seaside destination. It's full of casinos, high-rise buildings, and it's the second largest city. It also has an international airport, and there is a city called Kutaisi, somewhere in between, about 1/3 of the way from Batumi to Tbilisi, the capital. And there is an international airport there as well. The train stops directly at the airport. And of course, within the country, you can also travel by a minibus. This is quite kind of easy and frequent process, though that can take quite a long time to travel this way. You can also travel anywhere by taxi. The taxi prices are very cheap. Traveling within the city will cost between 1 and 5 euros equivalent most of the time. So oftentimes there's no point really to use public transport within the cities unless you're really on tight budget. So I'm talking about using apps like Bolt, which are very widely used in Georgia, and usually you can get taxi this way within minutes. You can use this also for a long distance trip. Oftentimes traveling between the cities this way will cost you only 30 to 50 euros. So unless you're on a tight budget, this is always an option. Traveling to other countries is more difficult. Generally speaking, if you want to go to the neighbor countries, so there is an overnight train connection to Armenia, but in general, other places you will probably have to take taxi or the minibus connections, and that can be quite long and uncomfortable. Regarding international flights, so there's 3 international airports I've mentioned. With regards to the direct connections, so as I've mentioned, for me, I went to Georgia not knowing what to expect, so I didn't book a return flight. And when I was in Georgia, I was going through this process, looking, okay, where I'm going next, when I'm going, from which airport. And what I saw is that most of the direct flights from these cities, it's especially quite reasonably connected to Middle East and Central Asia. So if you like to go to places like Kazakhstan, Dubai, and then transfer there to other places in Asia, it's quite good. You will have 3-hour flights perhaps. It will be quite cheap with local low-cost airlines. But of course, there's a lot of destinations to Europe, but compared to what you're used to from Europe, it will be quite limited. And you might have to, for example, let's say you choose to live in Tbilisi. It's the largest city, close to 2 million people, a lot of things to do. So perhaps you will have a base there. And it could well be that you have to fly from Kutaisi, which will be 3.5 hours by train. And even then, the destinations will be quite limited. And it's mostly serviced by a single airline, Wizz Air, which is not personally my favorite airline. But of course, it's possible to travel with them. And the fact that it's serviced, a lot of destinations are serviced by a single airline. You know, if something changes, they decide to not service those airports anymore, you can have very limited options in that case. So for someone who likes to travel often and go to other places, it may not be the easiest place to travel from if you want to build a base there. So that is certainly something to consider, but there are options. You might have to transfer. And from what I've seen, the transfers are not like the kind of easy transfers that we're used to. So, if the transfer is that you are transferring somewhere with a single airline, you have a single ticket to the final destination, there's few hours in between, that's fine. But if you have to fly to some airport in Istanbul and spend a night there, and then you fly with another airline, that's not really that ideal. So that's something for me, but if you don't travel very often, perhaps this is not an issue for you. So I would like to finish with some general remarks. So I was trying to see how the locals are, get some ideas for the cost of living and safety. Some things like that, of course, quite important. So what I see is that the country has a lot of natural resources, especially when it comes to food. There's a lot of edible fruits growing in the wild, especially things like apples, pears, pomegranate. So that's quite nice. In the villages, generally, there's animals running around everywhere. So this can have some road safety issues. But nevertheless, there are a lot of cows, horses, pigs, chickens running around in the countryside, just on the roads. So in that regard, there's plenty of resources as well. In terms of safety, apart from some interesting situations on the roads, I never felt unsafe in the country anywhere. The general perceptions, it's very safe everywhere. Even though a lot of people live on 200 euros a month, and there seems to be also a lot of quite well-off people, so there's big differences. I didn't have a feeling like it generates some kind of social problems or envy. Generally speaking, the cities are very walkable. It feels quite safe. Also with the taxi drivers, everything. The locals are generally speaking quite nice. They try to help. In the bigger cities, a lot of them speak at least some English, but in the countryside, generally don't expect anyone will speak English. A lot of people speak Russian, so if you speak that can be helpful, especially the older generation, because they had to learn it during the Soviet time. Of course, the mindset nowadays and the attitude towards Russian and Russians is not the most positive in the country, especially actually quite opposite, even though a lot of Russians now live there. But nevertheless, sometimes if you speak only English, the locals often suggest that you can speak Russian if that helps. I was trying to get an idea of how it was during the pandemic. So I wasn't there myself. I just remembered the restrictions and the rules because I was looking at going there at that time. And so I tried to speak to some locals, especially people from other countries who were there during this time, to see about what the experience was. And from what I understood, there were some official restrictions, but it was not really followed, which is what I would expect from a country like this. So you see, in these kind of countries, you might have some official rules, but this is not a kind of country where you really can expect the rules to be followed a lot, both by the locals, but also by businesses, which is what I was expected, and this was confirmed. So in terms of if you expect some restrictions like this to return in the future, that can be a good country to go. Also, it's in connection with the resources easily available. There's food available in supermarkets, also some small shops, mini marts, and there's some open air markets. They often sell a lot of fruits and vegetables. Sometimes they can be very expensive, and then you walk 2 streets away and then it's very, very cheap, and the quality can be very good as well. So usually you just have to look around. In terms of meat, from what I understood, a lot of it is deep frozen, what you can buy in shops. There's some open air markets where you can buy it fresh. Not quite sure how good the hygiene is. I didn't try. But in terms of eating in restaurants, generally speaking, it's quite cheap. So the country, generally speaking, is not dirt cheap, but it's cheap, especially if you go outside of the biggest cities. You can have very cheap accommodation, very cheap food. You can eat great in restaurant that you order a lot of things. You get totally stuff for around 10 euros. And in Tbilisi, it might be 20 euros, but that's like when you have order 2 dishes and a drink. You can easily eat for 5 to 10 euros per meal in most places when eating out. A lot of very good wine there. The cost of living in terms of accommodation, it's cheaper than in the West, but in the big cities, especially in the good parts, don't expect to pay too little. So if you want to have a nice part of town, a big apartment with a lot of rooms, it will probably be between 600 and 800, maybe 1,000 euros a month, depending on where. So that's not cheap, but it's probably still half of what you'd pay in some bigger cities in Europe. The prices of accommodation have gone up a lot in the last few months and years. In terms of investment, from what I see, it's still possible in Tbilisi to buy a small studio apartment for maybe 40,000 euros as an investment. So this will be something very small and very basic. But in terms of giving you an idea of the entry point, this is probably the minimum viable investment. I think the price per square meter is something like $120 starting at. So to give you an idea. Something interesting as a final word about the country. So the country is called Georgia in English. And something that you see everywhere, really everywhere, is pictures and even statues of Saint George slaying the dragon. So of course this is something you see in some places in the West also, but I've never seen it as much before as in Georgia. So Georgia, Saint George, some people think there is a connection in the name. In the main part of Tbilisi, the capital, there is a kind of square, and in the middle of that square there is a large statue on a big pedestal in gold of Saint George slaying the dragon. And basically in every church, no matter how small, there is somewhere some picture of Saint George slaying the dragon. I find that very interesting and very symbolic, because Georgia is something that we've looked at and a lot of other people are looking at or went there as a kind of place to escape some draconian measures and restrictions. And there you go, there's St. George slaying the dragon.